Flavia, let me put you on the spot. If there was one feature that a CEO needs to take on board for transformation, what would it be?
I think the one element for success, Stephen, is that a leader has to have clear, precise decision making. If a leader cannot articulate and stand by decisions made, the organization will flounder. If the leader looks around for consensus, believes that buy-in is going to be a ticket to their success, it's a fantasy. Yeah? It's about saying, I know. Well, really, Stephen, it's about saying not only I know, it's saying I have the chair. And most people will forgive a bad decision before they'll forgive no decision. It's okay to say, I thought we should go this way. I didn't do that remarkably well, and we're going to do it this way. In business, as you get more senior, as the business gets larger and the decisions get more expensive, perhaps they're a little less forgiving. But at least you were prepared to be courageous and take a decision. And again, if we look at lessons learned from history, courage of your conviction, courage to act on that conviction by taking a decision. Margaret Thatcher wasn't popular, but she stood by what she said, and she was prepared to make some fairly big ticket decisions. We see that in any great leader. Transformation often tries to make people believe that change is about communication. It's about stakeholder engagement. It's about making sure everybody's in on everything. And to be quite frank with you, Stephen, I actually think that has very little to do with the success. We look at 30 plus years worth of research into change and transformation, and continually we find communication is the least effective lever of driving change. Now, I say that, and you would think that I just blasphemed.
Well, you've said many things that are counterintuitive. You've talked about, popularity is not something you should be seeking, and this notion of what you just referred to there.
And again, popularity should not be sought, but you must always play it with heart. You have to have compassion. You have to understand this is a human condition. But that, I don't believe, begins by what I probably very disrespectfully like to call the newsletter and the t-shirt form of change management. It's like, look, here's your newsletter and here's a stubby holder and a t-shirt. Yay, we've changed, okay? What I'm actually trying to say is, when you give people information and support about making choices, then you're making a compassionate, precise move in your organization. Notice I didn't say, take away your decision. I didn't say, ask people what they think of your decisions. I said, make sure whenever you present your non-negotiables that people understand why, what value it will release, and how you're going to support them through either joining you or not. Oftentimes leaders also on this point focus on the people who aren't making the change and forget the people who have. Your early adopters, your people who went, this is fantastic, I'm on board, are so often forgotten. Stakeholder management focuses only on people who don't want to come. Why? They don't want to come. Allow them not to come. It's okay. And this is again where your company has that balance with process and governance. You're never going to say, but Bob is the only person who knows how that runs. Well, shame on you. Then your process doesn't support your business strategy. Your resource strategy isn't supported by capability. It all comes back to those core questions of leadership. Is my business strategy in line with my process, with my resources, and my people? Yeah?
Can I just ask you on the communications? You talk about communication in a, I won't say dismissive way, but perhaps not with the same priority as other considerations. Are you saying it's not important?
Not only am I saying that, Stephen, but the research shows us that communication is the least effective lever of change. I'm not saying it's not necessary at all. You do need to tell people what you're up to. But if you feel that needs to be the front runner, well then I hate to say it, research doesn't support that. We have available to us audit tools that'll go through and say, your capability, your leadership, various capacities in order to make a change. And oftentimes we see on this, survey that says, here are your top 10 results and your lowest 10 results. Top of the rung is always, I understand why the organization needs to make the change. Lowest one is always, I hear about the change from my line manager. People normally can get it. They get why an organization needs to acquire or divest or change a marketing strategy or add a new product. What they don't understand is what it means for them and how they can make an informed choice. And that's why they seek to find that from their line managers. Really, communication is necessary as a therefore. I have a great business strategy, therefore I can communicate it. I'm a precise leader that makes decisions, therefore people have a transparent view of what their choice is. Buy-in, stakeholder engagement, communication, these things are therefore of compelling change leadership. They're not things that you seek to do to drive change. Let me say that again. Great leaders are decisive, clear communicators. Therefore, communication occurs. Therefore, stakeholders are engaged. Therefore, change is successful, not the other way around.
Now, Flavia, I'm going to be a little controversial here. Many people watching might think that this whole change business is just creating an industry for itself, or for people like you to make money. What would you say to that?
Wow, I better be careful how I answer this, David. So is change and transformation creating an industry? I think in a lot of ways the answer to that question, Stephen, is yes. But it is not because it doesn't have fertile ground in which to create that industry in. Let me take that apart a little bit. I believe that if an organization and a group of leaders responsible for taking that organization forward don't have a well-articulated plan, do not have prior to that plan a statement of where they're actually going, it is really easy for, well, perhaps using an older term, but charlatans and work spinners to come in and say, you know, there really isn't anything going on here, but I can create something certainly. I've worked with organizations not dissimilar to my own where they come in and go to the leaders, basically looking at them saying, sit down before you hurt yourself and let me just do this. And it's like, how can an organization own a change when someone does that? But also, what I end up, the feedback that I get when we're engaged to audit the success or the progression of a program is, I don't know why we're doing any of those things. They just told us we have to. Well, frankly, Stephen, I think that allows leaders to really divest themselves of any responsibility for the program's success or failure, or for that matter, where the program goes. So in some ways, I think there's a couple of questions I'd ask. Yeah, the transformation industry can make a meal of things and create an industry out of what seems like very little. But they do that only because they're allowed. Someone is actually saying, I need to be seen to be doing this, and I need you to come in and make me look like I'm doing things. Now, I know that sounds harsh. I know it does. But we have an expression that we use around my firm, and that is, I look at leaders and say, when you wake up in the morning, can you pass the red face test? In other words, look yourself in the eye and say, am I actually sincere to my goal? And if you're not, well then, on your head be it, because they will spin as much business out of it as they can.
If I was going to, if I needed to embark on a change program for my organization, and I needed to go and find a company to help me do it, what kind of criteria would I use to evaluate companies such as yours? What would I be looking for?
I'd be looking for the language of business. And what I mean by that, Stephen, is I want to hear words like business strategy. I want to hear profitability. I want to hear growth. I want to hear sustained, repeatable process that's measured and governed. I want to hear the word data. Now, hard to believe that data can be a turn on, can't it? But I tell you, data, information, who has it, how much of it, how frequently, and how accurately is where business is successful, especially in this day and age.
Can I just ask you one question in closing, and that is change something that an internal executive could drive within an organization, or do we always need to go to external companies like yours?
You know, Stephen, I think the answer to that question is that transformation, change, wide-scale programs that take a company in a different direction should not be run by someone internal to the organization. That's not to say that you immediately turn to a consulting firm. What I'm actually suggesting is something slightly different than that, and that is to work with what I refer to as an outsourced executive. Let me tell you why, because I understand that's a fairly controversial thing to say. In order to drive wide-scale transformation, precise leadership, courageous planning, non-negotiables, you mustn't be worried about or too concerned with, is this going to impact my role here in the organization? And it is simply human nature to worry about that. So I'm not saying that someone can come through like a marauding Hun and rape and pillage. I'm not saying that. But somebody who is an outsourced executive, so they sit within your leadership team, they're an executive in your organization, but the agreement contractually is the person will not be with the organization post this change, however long it needs to be, allows that person to move and interact and relate without that additional pressure. Again, I don't believe a consultant is necessarily always the right answer. You need to assess the profile and what suits for that outsourced executive, nor do I ever think that it's great for an internal person to do it unless we see this as a transitional role for them elsewhere.
And yet I'm sure a lot of companies do that, so that's probably why we have those failure rates that you talked about earlier.
It does, because people naturally are concerned about where they're placed post a program's completion. And alas, success or fail, very few change managers I can think of in my 28 years of history that have been promoted. And I would challenge you to think of the person that you know who's been a change manager who's been promoted. Best for the organization to take a clear and concise decision up front that I am engaging this person for a suite of work. We have agreed boundaries and rules, and we move forward that way. It allows them to simply be more agile, and you get a better result.
Okay. Well, I think on that slightly controversial note, we'll come to an end, but it's been great having you here today, and thank you for your time, and I'm sure you found it very useful getting the information on how to run a change program successfully.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you very soon in the next production of the Executive Business Network. Thank you.